Yemenis nationwide celebrate the anniversary of the 14th of October revolution when Aden is in chaos and Sana'a under Houthi suppression. Hans Grundberg in his second briefing before the United Nations Security Council, Houthi offensive in Ma'rib must stop. Violent fighting between government forces and rebels in Ma'rib makes hundreds of civilians trapped. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fuad. Yemenis across the country commemorates the 58th anniversary of 14th of October revolution against the British colony. Today, in similar situations, Yemenis reunite again to restore Yemen as it was before. This report has more on this story.
The celebrations of the 58th anniversary of the glorious October 14 revolution has already started since yesterday. It's necessary to recall the huge sacrifices that were made in order to achieve the principles and objectives of this great revolution. The 14th of October revolution was able to achieve Yemeni independence from the British colonialism that preached on the chests of Yemenis in the south of the country for a century and more than 2 decades of history. The revolution of the 14th of October 1963, a natural extension of the revolution of the 26th of September 1962, and an important event for the Yemeni people, and is one of the most important revolutions that changed the lives of Yemenis and changed the course of history in the south of the country, in particular, and in Yemen in general. The importance of this blessed revolution is not limited to being the starting point for liberation from colonialism and its remnants, but its historical importance lies in the fact that it produced a state with unified identity that expanded all of Yemen. Ambassador of Yemen in Egypt, Mohammed Marim, said,
"This is a great day for all Yemenis in general and for Southerners in particular. It's not a normal occasion, but a turning point in Yemen's history when the British colony was defeated after a period of 128 years. Great and honorable men sacrificed their lives for the sake of their homeland and their noble aim, regaining the national state. Therefore, celebrating such a great day should not be by conventionally exchanging congratulations among us. Rather, we should, in the first place, recall this great day in terms of its symbolic nationalism and the patriotism of those great revolutionaries who sacrificed their lives for the sake of Yemen, freedom, stability, and development."
Adding to what the ambassador of Yemen in Egypt, Mohammed Marim, said, these Yemeni citizens had some opinions to say on the 14th of October revolution.
We stand in reverence and honor to the martyrs of the October 14th revolution, those who taught us lessons and who we still follow their path, even if we sacrifice everything to restore the republic that we dream of.
October 14th revolution is the revolution of Yemenis that ended the era of darkness into the light era. It's the revolution that complemented the September 26th revolution, which ended the Imam's rule and British colonialism. The revolution is what opened the horizon for the Yemenis towards a new life and a new history.
The celebration of the 14th of October revolution remains an incomplete celebration, and after war, always comes peace.
UN envoy to Yemen, Hans Grundberg, said that Houthi escalation in Ma'rib must stop and called on all parties to facilitate safe, timely, and sustainable humanitarian access to affected areas. In his second brief before the Security Council today, Grundberg said that Yemeni political factions expressed desire to end the war and acknowledged that Yemen can be effectively ruled by just one group.
As repeatedly stated in this council, Ansar Allah's military escalation in Ma'rib must stop. The Secretary General himself is following the developments in Al-Abdiyah closely. And I reiterate the UN's call on all parties to facilitate safe, timely, and sustained humanitarian access to the affected areas.
To Ma'rib, Health Office declared the Al-Abdiyah district a disaster area. amid a humanitarian tragedy that the district is experiencing due to Houthi siege and bombing of the only hospital in it. The office condemned bombing of Al Abdiyah Hospital while a number of wounded civilians were receiving treatment. Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Shaddad confirmed that Abdiyah is experiencing a severe shortage of all living requirements, including medicines.
What
Abdiyah is going through on the health side is quite catastrophic. It has been 25 days and we cannot deliver any aid under such a tight siege. So far, 3 deaths have been recorded. 9 soldiers and 24 civilians are wounded, including a woman. All could die due to lack of adequate medical services. In addition, the district was bombed yesterday and the health facility was damaged. We call on local authorities and international organizations to intervene urgently and stop targeting health facilities and lift the siege on Abdiyah.
Still in Ma'rib, hundreds of Yemenis are trapped by fierce fighting between government forces and Houthis in Al Jah district. According to Reuters, hundreds are stuck in Al Juba, with the battle for control of the gas-rich region displacing some 10,000 people last month. Meanwhile, government forces declared southern Ma'rib a military zone. Fierce battles also took place in Juba region, during which the militia suffered heavy losses. Yemen Today's correspondent said, quoting tribal sources, that confrontations took place in Al-Rawda, Al-Khuwair, Al-Qahira, and adjacent reefs. Recently, according to military sources, more than 40 Houthi elements were killed and wounded in a tight ambush set by government forces and tribes in the vicinity of Al-Juba. Still in south of Ma'rib, about 400 Houthi militiamen have been killed during the past 72 hours. According to AFP, coalition jets carried out 19 operations targeting militia's equipment and elements in Abdiyah during the past 24 hours, destroying 12 military vehicles belonging to the militia, and the human losses exceeded 108 of their members. On Monday and Tuesday, the coalition announced the killing of about 300 armed Houthi rebels, backed by Iran, in airstrikes as battle raged in the vicinity of Ma'rib city. Turning to Al Jawf, government forces seized a quantity of drugs east of the city that were on their way to Houthi militia-controlled areas. A military source confirmed that 170 kilos of drugs have been seized east of Al Hazm area, on board a car that was on its way to Houthi militia-controlled areas, indicating that the Houthi militia is using drugs for its fighters on the front lines. To Al Hudaydah, joint forces responded to Houthi fire sources that targeted civilian areas in Kilo 16. Military sources said that Houthi targeting has affected separate residential areas in Kilo 16. Meanwhile, joint forces inflicted heavy losses among the rebels. Houthi shelling on populated areas in Hudaydah has caused thousands of civilians to leave their homes and head to other places to seek shelter. This is considered flagrant violation to the Stockholm Agreement. More on this story is within the following report.
Houthi militia has forced people of Mandar in Hudaydah to be displaced after their homes were destroyed by Houthi missile bombing on the city as part of their escalation and continuous violations of Stockholm Agreement. One of the families transferred their remaining household items and furniture on a transport truck from Mandar in Al-Hawak, south of Hudaydah. They flee, fearing for their lives, from the continuous bombing and targeting of their homes by the militia, in violation of all international norms and laws, especially the Stockholm Agreement.
We were displaced out of fear for our lives from the continued Houthi bombing of our homes in Al-Mandar area. We were heading to safe places in the city of Al-Khawkha.
Hundreds of families were displaced last month from Al-Tuhayta as a result of the Houthi militia's escalation of artillery shelling on residential areas and citizens' homes. They have forced more than 700 people, about 100 families, to flee their homes in Al-Durayhimi, Al-Tuhayta, and Al-Mandar districts in Hawak, south of Hudaydah. Houthi militia escalated their attacks on residential neighborhoods and farms in Hudaydah, which led to a new displacement wave. Earlier, Al-Jahrufa in Al-Tuhayta was subjected to intense aggressive bombardment by Houthi militia too. A group of forcibly displaced families were forced to seek refuge from their homes to Al Haima area, looking for a safe haven from the daily aggression of Houthi militia. A state of fear, terror and panic prevailed among the residents as a result of the continuous shelling launched by Houthis on their homes, several times under the shadow of the Stockholm Agreement. Houthis forced hundreds of families to forcibly leave their homes from separate areas of the western coast.
Coming next. Houthis continue to silence freedom of speech and crack down Yemeni journalists relentlessly.
أقول لك راحت بالغداء لأهلها شلت الغداء وراحت بالأهلها في المزرعة، والمزرعة ركبت على حمار ما حتى نص المزرعة وانفجر فيها اللوم، دعست على اللوم وانفجر فيهم. الحمار انتهى ما ترى تبكعت رجليها كامل. نغير منها نغير الشبالة اللي هي البنت سابحة من دور رجليها اللي صافناها طبية أقرب طبية وصافناها هي بطلت رجليها كامل.
قلت الزود هلي وقابل لي لعب وطبعته تحت الزوايا.
Houthis human rights violations have targeted all Yemenis, and journalists are no exception. The following report tracks how journalists are cracked down by the militia.
Since Houthi militia took control of Sana'a, they have been seeking to control the media, consolidated their grip to suppress the media organizations in the capital, and then expanded their influence to include all areas under their control. This was manifested in violence and the imposition of electronic censorship, including the ban on the use of WhatsApp and other popular mobile messaging applications. Violations against journalists ranging from killing, arbitrary arrest, enforced disappearance, physical attacks, trumped-up charges or restrictions on their work, as well as restrictions imposed on their rights, especially the right to freedom of expression, in an attempt to stifle peaceful dissent, and the majority of them are being held in secret and unofficial places of detention. Yemen ranked lowest 169 out of 180 in the Press Freedom Index for the year 2021. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, around 16 journalists have been killed in Yemen since 2014. Also, there have been more than 1,300 different cases of violations against the press, including 35 murders of journalists, some of whom were attacked by snipers in front of television cameras while on duty. About 250 journalists are still in detention since the beginning of the conflict in the country. Immediately after seizing power, the rebels stormed many newspapers and media offices, closed them, looted, seized and dismissed many journalists, and used many of them as human shields in places with military uses, which resulted in a martyrdom of a number of them. The Houthi militia are still detaining and disappearing many journalists, employees of a number of media outlets, and other human rights defenders in prisons until this moment. An investigation published by the International Observatory for Human Rights confirmed that journalists and media professionals in Yemen during their 5-year detention period were repeatedly tortured by guards loyal to the Houthis. They were deprived of water and suffered other forms of torture, including being forced to hold concrete blocks for hours and were not allowed to communicate with their lawyers. These cases are against journalists and human rights defenders. They are classified as state security cases, and the trial lacks the lowest standards of fair trial. The legality of the evidence, its credibility, and its authenticity are not confirmed, while the local judiciary is unable to hold the real perpetrators of serious crimes accountable in Yemen. Freedom of speech has been confiscated since the Houthi took control. How can a country survive while they don't even have the right to speak in their own country?
The United States Special Envoy to Yemen, Tim Lenderking, said that Yemen is not just about war, it's about rich culture and innovation. This came during the envoy's visit to Yemen's pavilion in Expo 2020. Earlier in Amman, the U.S. envoy discussed with Yemeni CSO leaders the value of inclusive representation in the peace process, the urgent need to address the dire economic situation, and the importance of accountability by all Yemen's actors. The Yemeni rial continued its downward slump against US dollar. The rial sank further to a new historical level, recording 1,317 for the single dollar. More on the rial deterioration and its impact on people's life is within the following report.
The currency war in Yemen has overshadowed people's daily lives. Although there is one currency, it has two exchange rates, which is unusual according to experts. How did that happen? How does this affect Yemenis? The Houthi rebels and the Yemeni government are waging a war over paper currency, in a new front in the bloody conflict that threatens to complicate the lives of a population facing the worst humanitarian crisis in the world for years. The warring parties continued to use the same currency until the end of 2019, when the Houthi rebels prevented the circulation of new banknotes printed by the government in their areas of control in the north of the country. The result was the accumulation of these banknotes in the areas under the control of the government, which caused an unprecedented collapse in the value of the rial in these areas. The exchange rate reached its lowest level ever in recent weeks, reaching more than 1,000 rials per dollar in government areas, while in Houthi-controlled areas it remained stable at about 600 rials to the dollar. But people still suffer despite that stability. The United Nations has warned that the collapse of the Yemeni currency will make it difficult for Yemenis to afford food and other necessities. The humanitarian situation in Yemen remains dire, including the real threat of famine this year, said Florencia Martinez of the United Nations spokesperson's office. She noted that the currency collapse would lead more people to look to humanitarian agencies for support. She also pointed out that the fastest way to help is to increase support for the United Nations response plan for Yemen, which has so far only been 44% funded, noting that funding will start to run out again in September, which will force agencies to reduce aid at a time when people's needs are likely to increase. It would be disastrous for the millions of people who depend on these programs for their survival, she said. Economist and former advisor to the Central Bank of Aden, Wahid Al-Foudi, says that these old coins were taken from the bank's reserves, but experts have raised doubts about whether they were recently printed. The rebels quickly accused the government of printing these papers in 2021, and they immediately banned their circulation in their areas of control, and gave the people directions to identify these papers, which they considered fake. In the midst of this currency war, some are taking the opportunity to make profits through black market exchange operations, which push the rial further into decline. It seems there is no improvement in the currency situation. Whether banknotes are printed or not, they came with an old currency or a new currency, the situation is still deteriorating. And Yemenis need a radical solution. And the only possible solution seems to be ending the war.
The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 28 new cases of the COVID-19 in 7 governorates. Committee officials said on Twitter that 10 cases were recorded in Al-Mahra, 7 in Hadramaut, 5 in Aden, 2 in Al-Bayda, 3 in Al-Dawla, 1 in Taiz and 1 in Shabwa. Also 4 deaths were recorded plus 11 recovered cases. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 9,467, including 1,783 deaths and 5,975 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. Yemenis nationwide celebrate the anniversary of the 14th of October Revolution, when Aden is in chaos and Sana'a under Houthi suppression. Hans Grundberg in his second briefing before the United Nations Security Council, Houthi offensive on Ma'rib must stop. Violent fighting between government forces and rebels in Ma'rib makes hundreds of civilians trapped. This is the end of the news. It was Roshan Fouad. Thank you for watching.